I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Good evening. 41 minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as this country's 40th president, the American hostages in Iran began their flight to freedom. They left aboard 2 Algerian jetliners from Tehran's Mehrabad airport, blacked out because of war, their way lit only by the moon and Iranian television lights. Iran released photographs of 2 of the hostages, Army Staff Sergeant Joseph Subich, Jr. of Redford Township, Michigan, and Embassy Vice Consul Donald Cook of Ellicott City, Maryland. All of the Americans were led single file through a 15-yard gauntlet of 50 or so Iranian youths organized for the purpose, shouting a parting death to America. Iranian television filmed the departure and later broadcast a 3-hour propaganda program. It was a little more than an hour after the Americans took off from Tehran that they literally put Iran behind them, crossing into Turkish airspace. Their first stop on their long route home was Athens, where during a 90-minute layover for refueling of their planes, they were greeted by U.S. Ambassador Robert McCloskey. From Athens, they headed for Algiers, where 2 U.S. Air Force medevac planes were waiting to take them to Frankfurt, West Germany, and then to the Air Force Hospital in nearby Wiesbaden, arrival there expected tomorrow morning. It was a long and harrowing ordeal for the hostages, their families, and indeed the entire nation. And it was an ordeal that plagued the presidency of Jimmy Carter, an ordeal whose final resolution eluded his presidency by less than an hour. More on this story from Robert Pierpoint at the State Department.
President Carter worked in the Oval Office throughout the night and before dawn this morning signed the executive orders that triggered the hostages' release. His signature removed one final obstacle discovered by Iran yesterday, which might have prevented the Iranians from receiving money that rightfully belonged to them long after the hostages were home. Once this problem was resolved, the president ordered the flow to begin of nearly $8 billion in Iran's frozen assets to the Bank of England.
Right on, man. That's great. That's great.
About $2.5 billion in Iranian assets held in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York started moving then by electronic transfer to the Bank of England, while another $5.5 billion was moving to London from American banks around the world. Once all that money was assembled in the Bank of England, the Central Bank of Algeria was notified that Iran's funds were all in escrow. Algeria notified Iran to that effect, and Iran began preparing the hostages for departure. They actually took off from Tehran Airport aboard 2 Algerian planes at 12:41 and 12:44 p.m. Washington time, shortly after President Reagan had been sworn in. Within minutes after the hostages were airborne out of Tehran, a Department of State party, including former Secretary Cyrus Vance, took off from Andrews Air Force Base for Wiesbaden, West Germany. Former Secretary of State Muskie, who had come to Andrews to see former President Carter depart for planes, talked briefly to reporters.
Well, I got to say to you, I've been dampening my emotions for so many months that it's hard for me to release them.
Meantime, back here at the State Department, a lot of tense and tired people were beginning to unwind. At the Iran working group on the 7th floor, where officials and volunteers had held an around-the-clock communications vigil since the hostages were captured over 14 months ago, a celebration started. Special guests included the wives of 2 hostages, Louise Kennedy and Catherine Keogh. Tonight, the Iran working group disbands, its mission accomplished. Back in Plains, Georgia, former President Jimmy Carter also expressed his thanks that the hostage crisis had ended.
Early tomorrow morning, I will leave for Germany to welcome our hostages to freedom. And I know I will take with me the joy and the relief of our entire nation.
Tomorrow, citizen Jimmy Carter is flying from Plains to Wiesbaden, West Germany, as the guest of President Reagan, to welcome back to freedom the 52 American hostages who had dominated the last months, hours, and even minutes of his presidency. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News at the State Department.
One unsolved mystery. Why did it take the Iranians 6 hours to release the hostages after assurance that their blocked assets had been transferred? The Algerian planes were at the airport. It was unconfirmed, but reportedly the hostages were there. Why that last agonizing delay? No answer yet tonight. Iranian Prime Minister Raja, in a Tehran radio broadcast today, reflected on the 14.5-month-long hostage crisis. He said Iran's biggest achievement, as he put it, during that time was winning a new degree of self-reliance. And he added that one day Iran, quote, will not have to depend on a foreign country for any reason. The foreign ministers of the 10-member European Common Market said today that with the release of the Americans, trade sanctions against Iran would be lifted.
From Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
The 40th president's inaugural day was one of double celebration, and President Reagan seemed pleased to share the limelight with the hostages. Bob Sheeper reports.
The bells always signal Inauguration Day's traditional beginning, the church services. But as the Reagans returned from the morning services, the questions from the reporters were about events half a world away, the fate of the hostages.
When did you last talk to President Carter?
This morning before we went to the service.
Can you share with us the comments?
Yes, he was before me to inform me. The planes were on the end of the runway. The papers have been signed. The money has been escrowed.
It was the question that Reagan would hear over and over, the question on everyone's mind, including Reagan's, the question that hung over this day: are the hostages safe? Are they really to be released at long last? There was still no answer as the Reagans met with the Carters at the White House.
Well, I think President-elect and his wife will enjoy the new home.
It was still unresolved as the motorcade to the Capitol was underway. The new president did not mention the hostages specifically in his inaugural address. He returned to the themes of his campaign, that the economy must be repaired and defenses strengthened.
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We are going to begin to act beginning today. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever.
He closed on an inspirational note as he told the story of Martin Treptow, a young soldier who was killed in France during World War I.
We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, "My Pledge," he had written these words: "America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone." The crisis we're facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice that Martin Treptow and so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe that together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you. Thank you very much.
As the cannon salute signaled the official transition of power, back at the White House, the trappings of power were already being changed. The old pictures came down, the new ones went up. Beneath the Capitol dome, the president-elect sipped champagne and got right to fulfilling a campaign pledge.
An immediate freeze on the hiring of civilian employees in the executive branch.
There was a Capitol luncheon with congressional leaders, and by now word was beginning to come out of Iran that at long last the hostages were coming home. Thus, in his toast, the new president made the announcement that his predecessor had so hoped to make.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran. So we can all drink to this one, to all of us together, doing what we all know we can do to make this country what it should be, what it can be, what it always has been.
On that joyful note, Ronald Reagan went to his parade. Jimmy Carter had surprised the nation by walking, but Mr. Reagan rode. And the parade that followed was, well, just the way inaugural parades are supposed to be. It was a lot of ceremony for one day, and there would be more tonight, but Mr. Reagan managed to squeeze in one bit of personal business. He tried out that chair in his new office. He likes it just fine, thanks.
It's been a very wonderful day, and I guess now I can go back to California, can't I? It's all...
As darkness fell on this extraordinary day, the most spectacular fireworks show this capital has ever seen was set off on the mall. The new president didn't have to go out in the cold to see it. He had a perfect view from his new bedroom window. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Washington.
Shortly after the inaugural ceremony, former President Jimmy Carter took off for Georgia and a welcome home by his neighbors in Plains, as Lee Thornton reports.
The former president described this day as one full of emotional experiences, dominated by news of the release of the hostages. Of the Andrews Air Force Base departure ceremony with its 21-gun salute and final review of troops, Mr. Carter said his heart was so filled with the realization of what it means to be free that he fought back tears. Before he took off for Georgia, there was a promise for hostage wife Anita Schaefer to convey her love to her husband when Mr. Carter travels to Germany tomorrow. The military aircraft that carried the former president away from Andrews was the plane that served as Air Force One. As an aide put it, the mood aboard was lots of emotion, one moment laughter, the next tears. They came from all around and stood in the rain to welcome the Carters back home to Plains with an outpouring of warmth and affection for a son of the South of whom they are proud. And Jimmy Carter went right to his Southern roots to express his gratitude.
You've honored us beyond anything imaginable as I walk the streets of this town to sell boiled peanuts to the merchants in the stores here. And we hope forever to honor you with our lives in the years to come in being great Americans, and being good Georgians, and being good Sumter Countyans, and good residents of Plains, Georgia. God bless you. We love you all.
Mr. Carter said the day had been emotional but not sad, and happiness comes in the morning with a flight to Germany. Lee Thornton, CBS News, Plains, Georgia.
In the birthplace of the American president's great-grandfather in Ireland, they renamed the only pub the Ronald Reagan, and they danced in the town's two streets. In one of his first official acts, President Reagan formally nominated his cabinet and cabinet-level aides. The Senate went into session at mid-afternoon to consider their confirmation. Fairly quickly, Caspar Weinberger was confirmed as Secretary of Defense, and then the Senate turned to the more controversial nomination of General Alexander Haig to be Secretary of State. But no vote was expected on that before tomorrow. Wall Street traders saw little in the president's inaugural speech to encourage hope of quick economic improvement, and the market was down sharply in active trading. Former heavyweight champions slip out of the news as easily as ex-presidents, but Muhammad Ali was never your garden variety champion of all the world. Yesterday in Los Angeles, he responded like a superhero when a distraught man threatened suicide. Terry Drinkwater reports.
From a ledge 9 floors above Wilshire Boulevard, the hooded man shouted, "I'm no good. I'm going to jump. The Viet Cong are coming at me." Police, a psychologist, and a minister had all but given up trying to change the despondent man's mind when Muhammad Ali, who happened to be nearby, volunteered to talk to him. The former heavyweight champion went to a window and reportedly yelled, "I'm your brother. I want to help you." Recognizing Ali, the man finally opened the fire escape door and Ali approached him on the ledge. It was a very tense 20 minutes. Several times it looked as though Ali was going to fail. Then, suddenly, it was all over. The man, Ali said later, began to weep. He was taken to the psychiatric ward of a veterans hospital. The former champ promised to visit him there later this week. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Los Angeles.
When Iranians in Tehran and Americans in Algiers initialed the final agreement early Monday, it was believed the deed was done, but the hostage release was just hours away. Indeed, the Iranians said that. And then a hitch developed, one that was to leave the world on tenterhooks another 24 hours. Whose fault was that? Well, it seems that both sides knew there was to be an addendum to the main agreement spelling out the amount of Iran's frozen assets. But when that addendum reached Iran, the terms were not what the Iranians have been led to believe they were going to be. Steve Young has details.
CBS News has learned that the addendum was expected by the Iranians and had been seen by their London lawyers. But the Iranian officials did not expect that they would have to accept the dollar figures listed by the U.S. banks holding frozen Iranian assets as accurate or complete. They were especially enraged by a clause preventing Iran from negotiating for additional assets if any were located after the hostages were released. That's when the Iranians balked. At about the same time, the State Department was saying, there isn't a problem, just a process. At that point, the White House reached outside the U.S. government and called an American expert in international negotiating for help in locating the difficulty. The expert, in touch with Washington and Tehran, has told CBS News he explained to the U.S. government the Iranians thought the U.S. banks were making a last-minute bid to limit what they'd have to return to Iran. The expert told the government he agreed. An American banking source told CBS News both sides were getting increasingly paranoid, adding it was much ado about nothing. The banking source said U.S. banks were taking heat and didn't want to be blamed for preventing the release of the hostages. So the standoff ended about 16 hours after it began when the U.S. banks backed down. At about 4:15 this morning, Treasury Secretary William Miller said, do it. And the American banks released the frozen Iranian assets. Steve Young, CBS News, New York.
The stop for the hostages in Algiers later tonight seems only appropriate, since that's where much of the work was done that resulted in the Americans' freedom. David Culhane is there.
As the day began in Algiers, there was considerable anxiety that the entire deal to free the hostages might still fall through. American negotiator Warren Christopher and Algerian diplomats had spent another virtually sleepless night trying to iron out one more set of difficulties raised by the suspicions of Iranian leaders. All through the day, the Americans here refused to say whether agreement had been reached. But finally, the American embassy broke its rigid no-comment rule and passed the champagne.
Help yourselves, this is for you.
And American military aircraft arrived from Germany to take the hostages to Frankfurt. But there was one more ironic turn as preparations were made to celebrate the arrival of the freed American prisoners at Algiers airport. A plane flew in, not the aircraft bearing the Americans, but an Air Iran jet carrying a crowd of Iranian parliamentary leaders, apparently here on entirely separate business. One last bizarre episode to mark the day Iran finally let the hostages go free. David Culhane, CBS News, Algiers.
There is still one more American left behind in a Tehran jail. Her case unrelated to the hostages, Cynthia Dwyer, a freelance writer, was imprisoned last May. The State Department says it still doesn't know why, but is confident that a way will be found to free her too. Many of the hostage families, remembering so many dashed hopes, maintain they would believe the hostages were free only when their planes landed in West Germany. The freed Americans haven't arrived there yet, but most of the families are willing to concede anyway that this time it really has happened, and they celebrate it. Ed Rabel reports.
Marine Sergeant John McKeel's parents took the State Department call at home in Balch Springs, Texas.
You can take it officially that they are gone from Iran. Yay!
Barry Rosen's wife and children were at home in Brooklyn.
What did we just find out? That what? Please tell us.
Daddy's coming home.
Hooray! Yes.
In Tampa, Catherine Koeb's parents went right out and replaced the now tattered American flag that had been put up the day the ordeal began. The agony, the frustration of not knowing, 444 days of it finally really had ended.
I've waited 444 days. Just great.
I felt none of the joy or the jubilation that I felt the other night. I just felt
total relief. Thank God. They're in the air. They're free.
Virgil Sickman, whose son Rocky was a Marine Guard at the embassy in Iran, wanted everybody to remember those who died in the aborted rescue mission.
That we are overwhelmed with joy. And before I go, I don't want to forget this one thing of the 8 Americans that died on the rescue attempt of April the 24th. Our hearts go out to their family. And not one time did we forget, or will we forget, these 8 people.
Hazel Lee's 64th birthday is one she will always remember. It was the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated President of the United States. She might forget that, but she will never forget that her son Gary was released on this day.
The families of the hostages, of course, have the best reasons of all to be happy today because, as one family member put it, all of a sudden there's a future ahead. But millions of other Americans shared their joy in hundreds of different ways. Some celebrations were silent, some were noisy, all conveyed the same message. And that's the way it is. Tuesday, January 20th, 1981, a day that began as the 444th day of captivity and ended as the first day of freedom for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.
From Washington, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. These CBS stations contributed tape to the CBS Evening News tonight.